On April 19th, 1995, explosions tore through the Federal Building in Oklahoma City, ripping through the consciousness of America. 168 people were killed and hundreds wounded. Since that day of horror, groundbreaking new information has come to light, so provocative, so explosive, that it threatens to shatter everything we thought we knew about the true face of terrorism.
Based on the damage pattern to the building, what the government says is impossible.
I haven't stopped asking questions because I know that we haven't been told the truth.
What that tells you is that there were other explosive devices in the building that actually brought the building down.
I know for a fact Timothy McVeigh was with another individual on the morning of April 19th, right before the bombing.
He made the comment, yeah, we knew this was going to happen.
That caused a lot of questions in people's minds about, well, what really happened here?
The enhanced photo shows a very distinct possibility of a man standing behind that truck.
A lot of patients, I think, were lost that could have been saved.
The people that did the things they did knew doggone well what they were doing.
Some of these columns were ripped up, shredded, tossed around.
God, I hate to think that they did it on purpose.
Well, we can prove clearly that the official story is a fraud, that the government was involved and is using it to demonize good Americans.
Welcome back to History So It Doesn't Repeat. We're here in studio with James Lane and Holland Vandennieuwenhof, and they are the makers of a film called A Noble Lie, which we'll show a clip of later. First, I'd like to get a little general information about you guys as filmmakers and why you came together to create this film called A Noble Lie. Then we'll get into the storyline after we talk about the initial urgency of it. So what inspired A Noble Lie? Can you talk about the primary motivations of why you guys started making films?
We had been involved in the research. We were from Oklahoma City. We started collaborating with the Oklahoma Bombing Investigation Committee, started by State Representative Charles Key, to look into some of the anomalous evidence that came out after the bombing that indicated that the official story was not precisely true. And we became friends with many of these people, and we realized that the best way to get this message out, because the story of Oklahoma City had not yet been fully told at all. Remember, this was in the infancy of the internet, when the dissemination of information was not nearly so quick. So people really didn't know a whole lot about Oklahoma City. We did. We knew firsthand. And we decided that a documentary would be the best way to get the message out. And James started the movie company, and we kind of looked at each other. And I remember you asked me once, can we do this? And I said, I think we can. And so we did.
Well, I think it's amazing because after I read the thick book, the final report that I'm sure you guys have also read through, it's like, here's evidence of a tragedy and a crime that's ongoing, because Eric Holder, who was in charge back then, is now our Attorney General. So the people who were in power, who gained power from this whole tragedy, and from the evidence, it seems to be much worse than what the public was told through mainstream media. So just a brief summary of what, in your opinion, is like a one-sentence difference between what most people saw and were exposed to in 1995 as opposed to what you guys are talking about in your film?
I also want to address the first question, though, is, as activists, we were actually out there in the streets talking to people about the Oklahoma City bombing. We had, printed materials that we could get to them, and the top 10 reasons to question the official story of the Oklahoma City bombing. You can find that website at okcbombingtruth.com, and the flyer is downloadable and everything, but it just wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to get that information out. And because we knew the victims' family members and their survivors personally, we felt that we had an obligation, because it didn't seem like there was anybody else that had all of the resources available to them, through the victims' family members, survivors, and the Oklahoma Bombing Investigation Committee. We had all of the information there. So we did. I mean, it was really an obligation. We live in Oklahoma. This is our town. And, there's people that were involved in the Oklahoma City bombing that haven't been brought to justice yet. I mean, everybody that saw McVeigh that day, including the prosecution's own, witnesses, saw McVeigh with other people, Well, how can you say that justice has been served, whenever these people are still walking around? And we like to quote one of the bombing survivors who just recently passed away, V.Z. Lawton. He said, "Without truth, there is no justice." And that was really, I think, a big motivation, between all of us and why we got started. You brought up Eric Holder. I think that is a very important part of this, because it shows that people that were involved within governmental institutions that were involved in the cover-up, obviously involved in the cover-up, have never been brought to justice, and they continue to perpetrate these cover-ups, and the body count goes up every time. I mean, most recently with the Fast and Furious, there's over 2,000 human beings that have died from this, and they don't make any qualms about it. Yes, they're like, yes, they gave them the weapons. They covered it up. They said that they were going to use this event to perpetrate further gun control legislation
and propagandize people.
Yes, we actually got Eric Holder, in his early days on C-SPAN. You can look it up on YouTube, where he says that they have to brainwash the American people into thinking differently about gun control.
People as well. I've also asked the school board to make a part of every day some kind of anti-violence, anti-gun message. Every day, every school, at every level. One thing that I think is clear with young people and with adults as well is that we just have to be repetitive about this. It's not enough to simply have a catchy ad on a Monday and then only do it every Monday. We need to do this every day of the week and just really brainwash people into thinking about guns in a vastly different way. We also want to have...
And this is why we have to expose these people and bring them to justice, or these events will continue to happen and the body count will go up.
So living in Oklahoma City, being close in proximity, even though this happened in 1995, it's not just a passing news story because you guys live there. You're in the culture. There are unanswered questions, and it's hard to feel comfortable in your community when you don't know that justice is anywhere near certain. When you see these things go on and then they're replicated in other events around the world, it's a pattern. So which one of you came up with the concept of a noble lie? Where did you make the connection, and how does that relate to the story that you're really telling?
Well, we were talking about a title. We knew we were doing the movie, and it was going to be based off of Final Report. And so we were talking about using that as a title. But then when I came across the term a noble lie, we found that it was from Plato's The Republic. It's a lie told by the elite to maintain social harmony or the position of the elite. We just thought that was a perfect fit for what happened in Oklahoma City, because no matter what you think happened there, it's extremely obvious that a cover-up was taking place, and that people in positions of power capitalize upon this event to further their own agendas.
When you say that there's it's obvious that there's a cover-up, are you talking about that there are too many contradictions for it to be truthful, and therefore that's, without truth, there's no justice? So justice isn't being served because there's too many contradictions in the evidence to be examined?
Yes. The official story of the Oklahoma City bombing, for those of you not who are aware of it, is that on April 19th, 1995, a rented Ryder truck filled full of varying amounts of ammonium nitrate and fuel oil. At first, 1,200 pounds was reported, and finally a figure of 9,000 pounds has been bandied about, although that exceeds the weight capacity of a Ryder truck. Never mind. Anyways, a Ryder truck filled with ANFO, ammonium nitrate and fuel oil, exploded outside the federal building, supposedly in retaliation for Waco, and this killed 168 people. The official story is that Tim McVeigh was the lone bomber that day, despite, and everyone, and when I say everyone, I mean everyone who saw McVeigh in the Ryder truck on the morning of April 19th, saw him with other people. And as James said, for example, the prosecution, they produced 24 witnesses to talk about Tim McVeigh's calling card activities. One witness to place him in Oklahoma City on the morning of April 19th, who admitted under cross-examination that he was indeed with the fabled John Doe number 2. The official story is a wet paper bag. It holds no water. It's a testament to the power of the cover-up is that such a ridiculous story. And there's not even one official story. There are several put out by different agencies of the government, most of which contradict each other and even contradict with the media and its anointed job as gatekeeper and protector of the state. What have they released about the bombing? Nothing agrees. I would welcome a qualified debate from someone willing to defend the official story, a challenge that has thus far gone unanswered. Frankly, I feel sorry for anyone who would try to defend the official story. It's a wet paper bag. So what you're looking at is now we're not just fighting the official story. We're establishing history here. I mean, the primary purpose of this movie was not just to expose the fact that the bombing was a lie, or at least the official story is to reclaim history from the lie, establish for history what actually happened, using first-hand eyewitness accounts, using scientific evidence. In fact, our director of photography, Devin Winter, he was a professional photographer. He worked for all the big outfits that came through town, Oprah Winfrey, CBS News, all of that. He was on the list to be called up when a professional crew came through town. And he had interviewed some of our witnesses 3 or 4 times and heard the exact same story each time. The only problem was Nat Geo, History Channel, they would cut out everything that was contrary to the official story. And Devin's just standing there saying, yeah, I've seen this 3 or 4 times. This is the first time their full story gets told. Not unedited, but unscrubbed, raw, showing what actually happened, which is definitely contrary to what the government says happened. And because they own that lie, they're able to control and manipulate reality to that extent that we believe their lies. So the really important thing about this is you must not believe their lies, because in that extent, if you do and you live their reality, to that extent, they control you.
Well, and, to that end, we wanted to encapsulate this into one cohesive package where people could go and get the information in one spot. And a lot of the people that were involved with this have gotten up in age, and actually 2 of the people that were interviewed in the movie have already passed away. And so this was really the last chance to get all of their message in one
to memorialize it for history, so it doesn't repeat.
We tried to tell the story of the Oklahoma City bombing using the truth tellers and the original investigators, telling their story, and through that, revealing information about the bombing. We covered Glenn and Kathy Wilburn. They lost their 2 grandchildren in the daycare center. Glenn Wilburn, they were working just down the street, and they came running to the Murrah building, and of course, saw that the nursery was gone. That 20 children had died in that nursery, and unfortunately, Chase and Colton Wilburn did also. Glenn Wilburn, actually Kathy Wilburn, the wife, she started the Oklahoma City Truth movement in a way. A couple of days after the bombing, there was a memorial service at the wreckage of the Murrah building, and ABC News came up, or one of these major outfits on national TV, and asked her, what do you think, her opinion on the memorial service? And Kathy Wilburn, red hair flying, announced that she had questions about why the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms was not in their office in the Murrah building. Apparently all the agents did not show up for work, and according to several first responders on the scene, they told more than one person that they had been tipped by their pagers to not come into work. We have several affidavits attesting to that from different agents telling different people. So Kathy Wilburn started the questioning process. She had the moral authority because she had lost her 2 grandchildren. And Glenn Wilburn later died of pancreatic cancer. Glenn Wilburn continues to fight that battle today. She's released several books. We cover, of course, the Oklahoma Bombing Investigation Committee. State Representative Charles Key, B.Z. Lawton, also a survivor, a member of the committee. Hoppy Heidelberg, the grand juror, who was on the sitting grand jury to indict McVeigh, and started asking questions of his own, and was kicked off without cause because they could not answer his issues.
What questions and issues did he have specifically?
Well, Hoppy Heidelberg was an intelligent man. He was president of the Oklahoma Horse Breeding Association, successful rancher, cattleman. Maybe they underestimated him that way, but he was on the sitting grand jury that is supposed to hand down federal indictments. Usually this is a pretty straightforward process. There's the famous saying that a federal prosecutor could prosecute a ham sandwich if he wanted to, and it's literally true. But Hoppy Heidelberg had read the federal grand juror's handbook, which the federal government had given to him. And in that handbook it says, any grand juror can subpoena any evidence, not just the foreman, not just the prosecutor. And when he started...
And interview any witness, right?
And interview any witness. It's supposed to be an investigative panel, not just a sitting jury that's just, viewing evidence. It's supposed to be an investigative panel. As Hoppy Heidelberg said, not just to give the government the tools to put someone in jail, but to protect citizens from unlawful charges. It's supposed to be a protection, a sword, and a shield. And so Hoppy Heidelberg asked for the videotape evidence. He wanted testimony from explosive demolition experts. He wanted the blueprints of the building. He wanted the construction manager in the stand to see if it had been built to spec. He wanted the architect on stand. He wanted several other pieces of evidence which he had not been allowed to see. And he wrote it out in a letter, gave it to the federal judge, and they just dismissed him without cause. They could not answer those questions, so he was gotten rid of. And of course, the FBI started paying visits to his home, displaying firearms, trying to scare him into shutting up. But
force, fraud, coercion.
Exactly. It revealed the true nature of the government. And also, one of the major problems with the subsequent trial of McVeigh was that it was moved out of the federal district in which it occurred, Oklahoma. It was moved to Colorado. That may have been because Hoppy Heidelberg, a local, was asking questions, and they wanted to craft and mold the story, have it under tighter control.
Well, and that brings in another aspect of the movie that we had to cut because of time. I mean, this would have been a 10-hour movie, and we had to sit down and make some really hard decisions.
I'd like to see the 10-hour version. I'm sure a lot of people would.
Yeah, I mean, but we had to make the hard decision on what are we going to cut. And one aspect of that was the stay of execution request, and the attorney that worked on that. We had to cut that out. It just wasn't enough time. But he says, it shows very clearly that it is unconstitutional to take a murder case from one state to the other. And whenever he made that petition, the court said your petition is frivolous and without merit. They basically said the Constitution.
After recognizing the arguments.
Yes. They said the Constitution, in their court, the Constitution was frivolous and without merit. And this is really where he became aware that, of maritime law, et cetera,
sure.
and the transition from common law.
Sure. All right. So I have several notes just from what you guys have mentioned. So at the end of this, I'd like to get to General Parton's evidence and talk about that for a minute. But they prey on the youngest among us, and that is exemplified not only in Oklahoma City, but also in the preying on children in the compulsory school system. You've got Walter Lippmann, who at one point said, if you want to control a psychological operation, you have to control the media and you have to control the investigations. And what you're telling me is that there's censorship, and in the investigations, there's broken protocols. And as far as McVeigh being spotted someplace, wasn't he spotted a bunch of places? And so I'm just noticing all these patterns because I've seen Waco rules of engagement. And so I'm not under the impression that Waco was this thing that they could use for this other. So it's all about taking our Second Amendment rights away, taking away people's rights to defense against tyranny. And so where did the axle from the Ryder truck end up? If the bomb was right above that axle, I would expect it would be right at the bottom of that pit and it would be easily found. Where was it?
Well, that's a good point that police officer Don Browning brought up. He was one of the first responders. And according to the official story, the bomb was stretched from the one end of the truck bed to the other, yet that axle was found about over 100 feet away, wrapped around a parking meter. And actually, that's a very interesting story in itself because it actually hit a car first. And the people who drove that car parked in front of the Regency, walked inside the Regency Hotel next door. They heard an explosion. They ran outside to their car, and then the axle hit their car. Obviously, there was more than one explosion, and the first explosion was not the cause of that axle striking the car. Other data indicates, of course, that there were bombs going off inside the building before the truck bomb went off. But that axle wound up, 100 feet away, wrapped around a parking meter, and the FBI claims that they obtained a vehicle identification number off of that Ford axle.
Which is impossible.
It's impossible. We talked to the dealership. This has been established time and time again. The axle does not contain a VIN number. It contains a part number, and you cannot identify a particular vehicle. You cannot, this was verified by Ford themselves, by a part number on an axle.
Well, we expose this in the documentary. Noble Eye, you can find that at nobleeye.com, by the way. But there were multiple Ryder trucks. As far as the timeline goes, we've got James Sargent, who had retired from his career that day. So he really remembered what date it was. There was no question in his mind. And he was at the lake up in Kansas where this was supposedly, the bomb was mixed and everything. He sees the truck there days before they supposedly even had the truck.
Right.
So how many trucks were there? Was it, magic trucks that can carry more weight than they're supposed to? Multiple trucks, multiple spottings. Yeah.
Well, part of the psyop is that they always seed a bunch of evidence so that when something happens, people are like, oh, well, who's the actor, James Woods, who saw all the terrorists on a plane a couple weeks before 9/11. So he's a convenient witness to be like, oh, those guys it's how we're told it is, right? So it's always trying to convince us about the story. Well, I'm not convinced about this whole story of the Ampho bomb. That's ammonium nitrate, allegedly, that was used at the Murrow building. Yeah. And so what are the characteristics when one of those devices goes off? What types of things happen to the lungs of people who might be first responders?
Sure. Well, with ammonium nitrate and fuel oil, referred to as Ampho, One of the hallmarks of an ANFO bomb, any time that it's been used, except for the Oklahoma City bombing, is a nitric gas cloud. I mean, we know this from the bombs in Ireland. We know this from Sterling Hall 41 years ago this August.
That was where students put a bomb very close to a chemical lab.
When they bombed the Army math lab with an ANFO bomb. And we actually compared and contrasted several ANFO bombing attacks in history with the Oklahoma City bombing and found that they were not congruent. And the Army math lab, they actually parked that truck right next to the building. And a similar configuration, and it just cracked the facade. The Army math lab was closed for one day. And there was a nitric gas cloud.
The 26 first responders to Sterling Hall were actually hospitalized. A great number of them were hospitalized from the inhalation of the nitric gas cloud. We didn't see this in Oklahoma City. We've talked with the survivors that were in the building. They walked through there. There was no problem with respiration other than a little bit of a sulfur smell from the burning gasoline from the cars out front. Terrence Yankee was a police officer there that day, and he was one of the first people on the scene. He saved 8 people's lives that day. He was a true hero, and he had no problem with respiration. He was there within minutes. You know, that nitric gas cloud would have taken, no matter how strong the wind was, would have taken time to blow away, and he's pulling people out of the building, saving their lives. So I think all of this goes to question, you know, was it really ammonium nitrate and fuel oil? The FEMA report says that blast wave was traveling at 1,500 feet per second. Okay, this truck is only, feet away from the building. Now, we've got people that are inside the building that talk about this in the documentary, that the building was coming down 8 to 10 seconds before the glass blew in, to the point where people had time to say, get under your desk, it's an earthquake. And they get under their desk, then the glass blows in. Now, if that blast wave is traveling to 1,500 feet per second, explain to me how people have time to assimilate the information, formulate a plan, follow through with the plan, then the glass blows in. Now, 8 to 10 seconds would allow for something like that.
Well, and the concrete columns and rebar are sheared, and that's not compatible with a blast wave of a bomb of the estimated size, even the hyperbolized estimated size at that distance, and there's unequal damage. So how did you guys learn from the work of General Parton and his investigation into the blast wave and the erroneous shape that takes place when you look at the evidence of the blast wave juxtaposed to the alleged reason or cause of that blast wave?
Well, the damage at the Murr building is problematic. The crater in the street is dramatically offset from the major damage to the building. The damage to the Murr building consisted of basically the entire facade was blown off. The front set of columns was destroyed. And then there was a major bite that went almost all the way through the building on the northeast side. And the truck bomb, the crater is offset from this major damage. The blast wave did not perform in a symmetrical manner, which is unexplained, unaccounted for. And at the distance that those columns were away from that truck bomb, according to the blast charts that no one disputes, no one can dispute these figures, that a blast wave would have been about 10 times less powerful than what is necessary to dissolve the concrete and cut the rebar. And that is problematic also. Had those columns failed due to air blast, they would have been cracked and connected by rebar, but they were cut, which means a contact explosive.
And the big bite in the building, like you say, is so far offset from where the truck was. The blast would have had to go forward and take a right-hand turn. It's like the magic blast. It's like the magic bullet. We're supposed to believe that the laws of physics are suddenly suspended in these types of attacks.
Magic is symbolic of the contradiction that we should all pay attention to, because it's that magic that they need to convince you that this one bullet went through and made these turns, or it's the magic that they make you believe that this thing caused this thing when the evidence doesn't match up in cause and effect reality. So, do you have any other comments on Parton?
Yes, we interviewed General Benton K. Parton for the movie. He issued the famous Parton Report not long after the bombing. General Benton K. Parton was former head of Air Force Weapons Development. He tested and developed the Smart Bomb and pretty much every piece of ordnance that was used to blow things up for about 30 years. That was his job, conducting bomb damage analysis. He came to Oklahoma City, conducted a BDA, and he issued the famous Parton Report, which he issued to every member of Congress and the president, of course, saying that it was impossible, using many of the arguments I just used, for that truck bomb to do that damage. Mm. And you may say, well, this is all academic. These are all theories. These are competing theories. Maybe someone should do a simulation. of the Oklahoma City bombing and see if either hypothesis bears out. Well, that has been done by the United States Air Force. The Air Force Armaments Laboratory at Elgin Air Force Base, the Wright Armaments Laboratory actually, they actually conducted a simulation of the Oklahoma City bombing. They took a truck, actually they took an info bomb, they configured it how McVeigh and the FBI said it was, a dozen barrels packed with ANFO. And what they found was that each barrel acted as a separate explosion. It did nothing to their cheap mock-up test structure. Most of the remaining power shot straight up in the air.
So they canceled each other out and
Yes.
didn't make an aggregate explosion, as the theory for a layman might have you hypothesize in your head before you ask the questions that lead to the knowledge.
Well, they were trying to demonstrate the hypothesis and it didn't work. So they actually constructed a single more powerful 4,000-pound bomb, a real 4,000-pound bomb. And they exploded it outside their cheap 3-story mock-up with no roof, no support columns. It was just a cast in place, no rebar. And it did less damage to their test structure than what a less powerful bomb supposedly did in Oklahoma City, dramatically so, impossibly so. So then they actually exploded bombs inside their test structure to test the hypothesis of interior bombs, as demonstrated by eyewitness testimony, analysis, and the seismograph at OU and 3 other locations, which recorded 2 explosions 10 seconds apart. And the conclusion of the Wright Armament Laboratory is that the Murrah building in Oklahoma City was not destroyed by an exterior truck bomb, that there must have been bombs inside the building. So you have one branch of the government who has tested this hypothesis, found it faulty, and cried out for more testing on a more suitable hypothesis, more likely one. And then you have the Justice Department saying it was just a lone truck bomb. So they can't, like I said, they can't even get their story straight.
And this is also backed up by the inventor of the neutron bomb, Dr. Samuel Cohen, who says that it would be against the laws of nature, no matter how much ammonium nitrate and fuel oil was used, to do the damage that was seen at the Murrah building. Now, I mean, when you bring in people that have this level of knowledge and expertise that are saying that there is no way it would work, you know, I think that it's obvious what happened.
A Noble Lie, Oklahoma City, 1995, will change forever the way you look at the true nature of terrorism.
The grand jury did not want to hear anything I had to say.
The decision was made not to pursue any more of those individuals.
The greatest manhunt there's ever been.
Do you remember the Whitewater investigation in Arkansas? All the paperwork was stored in the Murrah building.
Hey, somebody knew about a prior bomb threat.
Every bit of important evidence has brought us to the Oklahoma City bombing.
Expose the cover-up now at anoblelie.com.
Were there any witnesses who might have seen if the possible placement, if the hypothesis is that it's not the official story and that there were incendiary devices placed in the building? Surely there must have been some witnesses. Have you guys run across anyone in your research who possibly witnessed any of this type of thing?
Well, Jane Graham worked for the HUD department. And she was the one that I was telling you earlier that she was in a Windows 95 training class that morning, and she was told, you know, it's an earthquake, and she said, "I didn't feel like an earthquake." Then the blast went off. But she actually saw some individuals in the basement prior to the bombing.
Yes, the Friday before the bombing, she showed up to the underground parking garage, and she noticed a 3-man work crew who were installing what she thought and looked like gray putty connected with wire to the supporting columns in the parking garage of the Murrah building. Only afterthought dictates that this was most likely C4 plastic explosive. This is further confirmed by the fact by a video affidavit that I took from a first responder who was saying that the ATF officers on the scene, they weren't in the Murrah building that morning, but they showed up in response, or actually they were on site outside the building as the bomb went off. That was reported by police officer Terrence Yankee. One of the major points he brought up was that there were agents outside that building. When he pulled up 4 minutes after the bombing, he shouldn't have been there. Well, some of these ATF agents on the scene confirmed amongst themselves and overheard by the first responder I deposed that they had swabbed the interior columns and it had tested positive for C4 plastic explosive. Jane Graham saw a crew installing actually, you know, putting C4 on the columns. We have a secondhand report from another person.
She just didn't understand it was C4 at the time.
She had no idea. She was a civilian. And she was later able to pick out one of these men from a police lineup as Andy Strausmeyer. Andy Strausmeyer is a German national. He had worked in West German Army intelligence, and he had come to America in the mid-'90s, actually early 90s, and ensconced himself within the neo-Nazi right. At the time of the bombing, he was chief of security at a neo-Nazi compound in eastern Oklahoma called Elohim City, which means City of God. We went out there to investigate there and to verify if Tim McVeigh, as reported by witnesses, had been there or not. The FBI denies he was ever there for some reason. And we did interview a witness who did say that had seen McVeigh there. Not only that, the ATF's own informant prior to the bombing, Carol Howe, was saying that Andy Strasmeyer, the agent provocateur, was advocating assassinating public officials, bombing federal buildings. She actually drove Strasmeyer and other suspects to Oklahoma City before the bombing to scout targets. After the bombing, Strasmeyer is never investigated. He's fingered by Jane Graham inside the building with C4. The investigation in him consists of one phone call after he went home to Germany in which he denied all knowledge, and it comes out in the FBI's own reports from FBI Director Louis Freeh and a teletype from the Southern Poverty Law Center that they were being provided information by Andy Strasmeyer, an informant, agent provocateur in the building with C4, planting bombs.
Now, Andy Strasmeyer is a character that, he's a thread that ties a lot of this together. It seems like every step along the way, this guy's involved somehow. And what's really kind of interesting and strange about this process as the movies come out and, we're 17 years on and, it's strange how information's still coming out. We were doing an interview. We had Jane Graham in studio at our offices, and we were just sitting there talking about Andy. And she mentions that there was the car that she saw in the basement. Well, it was the perfect description of Andy's car, and we knew that from him getting pulled over. At one point, his car was going to get towed, and he just gets a free pass. They make a phone call, and they're like, "No, let him go." And that from those reports, we knew what kind of car it was. That even matches the car she saw in the basement. So information's still coming out about this.
All right, so let's break down some of the characters who made this all possible, because there's not just one individual. There's several individuals that you interview in your film who over a number of years, either on that day or in the aftermath, have helped to find, they were, in the case of Terrence Yankee, he was searching actively for truth and he got stopped. In the case of Charles Key, he goes on a different path of how to get this information out there. Could you elaborate on Terrence Yankee first and then Charles Key?
Terrence Yankee was, of course, the first officer to respond, and he died. It was found dead about a year after the bombing on federal property under suspicious circumstances. Yankee had been asking questions about the bombing because he was a hero that day. He rescued 8 people. Not only that, he was a pillar of the community. He was a member of the DARE program. He went to the local schools telling the kids about the dangers of drug use. Looked up to as a father figure by many children. In fact, we were approached at our initial screening in Norman, Oklahoma by someone who had known Officer Yankee as a DARE officer, had really looked up to him, and he had been really disturbed by the news that his hero, Terry Yankee, had killed himself. For apparently no reason. There was no note found. His body was found on federal property with a dozen wounds on his body packed with mud and blood as if he'd been dragged. The cause of expiration was a small caliber bullet wound that came in upper left head and exited lower right jaw. Obviously, this is not a suicide. There were no powder burns found on his body. He was handcuffed, but they ruled it such. And the message was passed, not only to Terry Yankee, obviously, to silence him, but to other first responders who may want to talk about what they saw. I have been approached by police officers just out of the blue who told me about Terry Yankee and that he had been killed because of what he had seen. So the lesson was well learned.
So it's a lesson of learned helplessness, and you recognize the pattern after you start to recognize these continuing contradictions. What about Charles Key? What role, aside from the final report book that, came out, I think in 2001, how else did he play into the film?
One other thing about Terrence Yankee, though, the intimidation, that message that you're talking about, the learned helplessness. Don Browning was an Oklahoma City retired police officer, and at the time he was working in the search and rescue unit with the canine group. And he was asking questions, and he was actually told by an FBI agent that people that ask questions like him, them and their wife usually end up dead. And he said the way that it was said to him, he said it was a threat. And so there's just this whole era of intimidation, murder, cover-up.
Controlled by fear.
Yeah, being perpetrated by these institutions. Because, as Holland said before, the primary goal of these institutions is not truth and justice, it's self-preservation. And they will do whatever it takes to preserve that institution. Now, you asked me about Charles Key. State Representative Charles Key, he's somebody that, I personally look up to have the bravery to do what he did at that time, risking everything, his family safety, the security of his job, everything, because he wanted to do the right thing. He had constituents that were coming up to him and saying that, we've got questions about the way that the story is unfolding, and we've got evidence. Who can we take this to? And so he felt a responsibility to follow through with that. They formed an independent committee called the Oklahoma Bombing Investigation Committee, along with members that Holland's already mentioned. And they proceeded to talk to federal representatives and find out, what can be done about opening an investigation. They were told, create a report. And so that's where the final report came from. This was the culmination of, many years of their research, and they were going to submit this to Congress, for a congressional investigation. Well, they finally get to the point where it's completed, and it was 3 weeks before 9/11 they submitted it to Congress, and then after the events of 9/11 it was just completely overshadowed. To this day, all of the information within the final report has stood without, it's impeccable information. It was really well researched and done well. So Charles Key and the Oklahoma Bombing Investigation Committee was really what we used for the first part of the movie. A lot of aspects of the movie. And then we built on what had happened since then, new information that's come out by independent researchers and victims' family members.
Now, what role did the national media play, not only in the cover-up, but in the continuing propagation of the myth?
Well, oftentimes, a lot of this anomalous evidence is reported by the mainstream media, especially local media. But after the 2-week news cycle is over, it's just not packaged for mass consumption. In the case of Oklahoma City, there were local media outlets reporting from hour one about the other bombs found in the building, about John Doe number 2 and other such things that have long since been ignored or covered up. One station in particular, Channel 4 KFOR, they actually for a year after the bombing was reporting on John Doe number 2. The fact that the governor of Oklahoma, his brother, Martin Keating, had written a book describing the Oklahoma City bombing.
I have a copy of that book.
With a character named Ted McVeigh, which was written by the author's own admission on the Stan Solomon show 3 years before the bombing. Of course, this is ridiculous, but it happened and it was reported. About a year after the bombing, KFR News was purchased by the New York Times Broadcasting Company. Jana Davis, the lead reporter, she was let go. The program director was let go, and all reporting that was actually contrary to the official story, that all stopped. On the national level, we have ABC's 2020. They actually produced a 15-minute segment on prior knowledge, talking about the fact that the bomb squad was at the building up to 2 hours before the actual bombing, talking about the ATF not being in the building and their flimsy excuses, which have not withstood the test of truth at all, as demonstrated on before a grand jury. Their excuses for why they were not in the building have been proven a lie. This segment was so popular that they produced a second segment to be followed up. And we talked to the producer himself, retired Marine Corps Colonel Roger Charles, who actually just recently released a book called the Oklahoma City Bombing, What the Investigation Missed and Why It Still Matters. He produced that segment, and they played a fluff piece instead. He was waiting at home to watch it, and he called up his bosses at ABC, and they said, "Hey, what happened, man?" And they said, "Well, after a series of calls from the Justice Department, we agreed to pull this fully produced show." So you see the manipulation of the media on the local level, on the national level, and what actually happens to this evidence when it's revealed.
Who was in charge of the Justice Department at that time?
That was Janet Reno.
Oh, okay.
But the person directly in charge of the Oklahoma City bombing at that time was current Attorney General Eric Holder.
Now, one thing that shows, or another aspect of this that shows the overall push for intimidation, be it the control of the media, be it the intimidation of law enforcement, murdering of witnesses. The Oklahoma Bombing Investigation Committee was actually listed as their website. And granted, this is a state representative that started
Survivors.
Survivors, yes. Their website was listed as a domestic terrorist website in a fusion center. Operation Defuse, and specifically John Bush and Catherine Bleich provided us with information that shows the actual, link where it goes down. It says Domestic Terrorism, Oklahoma Bombing Investigation Committee website. And then they say for questioning the, official story of the Oklahoma City.
We have been told by officials within the Oklahoma City Bombing Memorial that questioning the official story of the bombing is hate speech.
But it's funny, when we were out there at the memorial handing out free copies, this last anniversary, we handed out 500 free copies of the movie to all the people that showed up at the memorial service. We had a lot of people coming from the museum. I'm not going to name names, but they were coming over wanting a copy of it. Yeah. So they questioned it.
The whole idea of corporate media purveying some sort of truth that we can take to make accurate decisions has pretty much been debunked by anyone who's directly watching this video, and then we use it to share with our family and friends so that they can figure out what's going on. So would you mind explaining to the folks at home, what role does independent media play in this? If the corporate media is suppressing and changing the truth, what are we doing here?
Well, what we're doing is we're taking the technology and the social media and the ability to circumvent the mainstream media, and we are becoming the media. This is a responsibility, I think, of anybody that gets involved in activism, has understanding about any of these events. They have a responsibility to become the media themselves. I mean, be it blogging, be it a YouTube channel, be it anything. And this is all we did. I mean, if we can do it, anybody can do it, and what we're trying to do is focus our energy on projects that act as a force multiplier, to be able to get this information to people, have them question, the reality of some of these events while we're sleeping. We want this DVD out there working for us. I think that's the best use of our time in there, and other people can do it. There's great blogs out there. There's shows like yours. I think that every year I see more and more people taking charge, like this and becoming the media. And it's very important, I think, for the, future of freedom, because, it's obvious at this point that the media is owned by the same military industrial complex, corporations. Why would they put out any information that would contradict,
their business plans?
Their business plans,
right. Yes.
It's obvious to anybody. Everybody knows, the media lies. But then they'll turn on, Fox News or, Fox News lies, I'm going to watch MSNBC. No, it's all lies. And everybody knows that deep down.
Truth's not for profit. In their case, it's not in their model. It doesn't help them raise their profits. It actually lowers it and gets their advertising canceled. And their shows canceled. So, they also have a learned helplessness in corporate media. They've seen people come on and try to, go out and tell some truth, and that person just loses their spotlight, their platform to speak to the audience, right?
Yeah, and another, a person that has kind of become their own media. Anytime he gets any types of documents or anything, it goes out on the internet immediately. He's pushing, gotten amazing information through FOIA requests, is Jesse Trinity.
Yes, we interviewed Jesse Trinity in the movie. His brother Kenneth, just a couple of weeks after the bombing, was picked up on a parole violation out of San Diego. Flown by Con Air to the Federal Transfer Center in Oklahoma City. This seemed rather unusual. It was more of a misunderstanding than a parole violation. He had crossed the border with Mexico many times. And for some reason, they snatched him up, flew him by Con Air, and Jesse Trinity talked to him by phone. He's an attorney in Salt Lake City, and everything seemed all right. They didn't think he would even go to jail. If so, just a couple months, no big deal. This guy's done hard time for a bank robbery conviction in the 1980s. Kenny did, but he had turned his life around. He had a job, he had a family, he had everything to live for. A couple days later, Kenny Trinity was found dead in a cell. His head is caved in. He has bruises all over his body. The soles of his feet have been beaten in. He has been tortured, as reported by the Oklahoma State Medical Examiner, Vernon Jordan, who told the Trinity family that their son and brother had been tortured to death in prison. The only problem is that Kenny Trinity was alone in that cell. The person who found him was a guard. His throat had been slashed, and they ruled it a suicide. A suicide. Of course, this is ridiculous. The Trinity family won a wrongful death lawsuit against the government, and they put the money up to find the true murderers of their son and brother. And right before Tim McVeigh was executed, he passed a message to Jesse Trinity saying, "I've been following your brother's case, and I think the FBI murdered him because they thought he was Richard Lee Guthrie." Kenny Trinity, a bore an unlikely resemblance to Richard Lee Guthrie.
John Doe number 2.
John Doe number 2, who was one of the alleged, supposed, and probable accomplices to Tim McVeigh the morning of the bombing. The FBI denies this, but they believed it to an extent that they were willing to kill a man out of that belief. Kenny Trinity had nothing to do with the bombing. He was killed in a case of mistaken identity. But because of that, Jesse Trinity has pursued a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, crusade against the government since that day, trying to expose the lie that is the Oklahoma City bombing because it killed his brother. He took it personal. And that those suits continue to this day. Right now, he is seeking the videotapes that ringed the downtown area in that federal building, tapes that the government claims do not exist or that they have lost. And the only footage that they have released, when not denying it under national security grounds, they claim that these 3 or 4 different tapes played by three or four different security companies on 3 or 4 different types of businesses all changed their tapes at 9:02 a.m. on April 19th. 1995. This, of course, is ludicrous, but is on par with much of the excuses put forth by the government.
So it's like too many contradictions or too many coincidences. We can all tell when there's too much information for the story that they've given us to make sense. And so now I'd like to talk about the reason that you guys actually made your way to Connecticut. We spent several hours yesterday filming for your upcoming movie, State of Mind, The Psychology of Control. And I'd like to talk just a couple minutes about that before we close up.
Well, you did a great interview. Thank you for participating in the production. It was really good. State of Mind. We really have wanted to do this after our investigation into the Oklahoma City bombing. We find out about Dr. Jolyon West and his participation with Timothy McVeigh's defense team.
So MK Ultra involved with Timothy McVeigh.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, Dr. Jolyon West was like number 2 in mind control psychological warfare, just under Dr. Ewan Cameron, and he really pioneered the 3 Ds: dependency, debilitation, and dread, which is the main form of torture being used in Guantanamo Bay, Abu Ghraib. I mean, this is the standard operating procedure now for so-called enhanced interrogations. It's obviously torture, Dr. Jolyon West was involved with Sirhan Sirhan, Jack Ruby, Patty Hearst.
Right.
Seems like every time that there's one of these events that need some sort of cover up, this guy came in and took care of it. And his protege, Dr. John Smith, again, both of these guys were based out of the University of Oklahoma at certain points. He's now head of a psychiatric department at Guantanamo Bay.
And Dr. John Smith had been Tim McVeigh's personal psychiatrist while he was in prison awaiting trial. Dr. Jolyon West had been brought in to evaluate Tim McVeigh, recommended his own protege, John Smith, to treat McVeigh. John Smith later served as chief of psychiatry at Guantanamo Bay. And we combine that with other evidence indicating that McVeigh was part of a special program while he was in the Army, and we are facing the prospect of a mind control patsy.
So we're looking now at the bigger picture. It's like we got into a very specific subject matter with our first documentary, A Noble Lie, again at anobleye.com. But we wanted, with State of Mind, The Psychology of Control, we want to take a big picture, a big overview about what are the motivations for control, how are we being controlled, be it government school indoctrination, propaganda, psychological warfare, even the history of MK Ultra, which is, undenied. I mean, they just, it's out there in the open what they've done. And we want to encapsulate this into one package to where a person can sit down, show this to their friends and family using the same methodology that we did with A Noble Lie, documented evidence and eyewitness testimony, no conjecture, just solid information. People that watched A Noble Lie that were skeptics, they thought, well, I'm going to see a conspiracy movie. They leave with a changed mind. They said, no, this was an expose.
It was about history.
Yes. And this is the same thing that we want to do, exposing the ruling class's methods of control of the population. We want to do it in a way that is palatable to the uninitiated, where you can take this to your parents, you can take this to your friends and family and show them this, and it'll approach them in such a way that they can start thinking about how are they being controlled, and not in a conspiratorial way, just showing the facts.
How, in your opinion, for the last question, is it possible to stop history from repeating? And if so, how do we do it?
Well, naming the methodology, exposing it, robs it of its power to a large extent. If we know that a charade is being, used on us, we can fight back. We don't have to believe it. And the real thing about this, one of the real missions of the movie was, obviously, the state is invested in blood, especially when they become desperate to pass a particular agenda. So they will use this methodology time and time again. Why? Because they are not held accountable, and 2, because it works. These are very utilitarian arguments. And so it will happen again, and we may be witnessing that right now with some of these mass shootings going on. I won't go into that, but there's some fishy things going on, especially links to mind control.
Patterns. There's a lot of patterns there,
and
especially
we know
who he was being treated by.
Yes, exactly. And we know that this government does not shy away from bloodshed when it comes to trying to pass a particular agenda. So when it happens again, look at it in the lens of a noble lie and what we know to be true about government false flag operations. Rob it of its power, not comply with whatever horrific agenda is on the horizon, which is sure to come when they pull this off, because they wouldn't be doing these acts if they could pass this legislation, take away our rights without a fight. They do it because we prize these things and will not give them up unless scared into it. So they must scare us. We must resist, must not comply. One reason, again, we also moved on with state of mind, exposing the methodology of control so people can recognize what is going on, see the true nature of this world, and knowing that, come up with effective tools for effective change.
You know, we have to hold these people accountable that perpetrate these events, that are involved in the cover-ups, all aspect of this. We have to hold them accountable. There has to be some way to justice, or these patterns repeat themselves. And this is where, you know, I encourage everybody. I mean, obviously, if you're watching the show, you know, you understand that we're in trouble and we need everybody involved. So thank you for your participation, you know, at that level. Thank you for what you're doing with this show. You know, we need more people doing this. If just, you know, 5% of us would just get off the couch and do something
constructive, you know, with our time.
Ask yourself, what have I done today to expand or preserve individual freedom? I mean, that's all you've got to do. If you can achieve that every day, if everybody just did a little bit of that, I think that the problem would be solved in no time. But, you know, I think holding these people accountable, exposing these types of events, you know, again, talking to friends and family, you know, showing them. I was able to wake my family up. I was very grateful for that. I know some people that, you know, their families don't even want to talk about it, but I am grateful for that.
I'm grateful for your DVD because, like I said, it's the only thing that my dad watched that he thought was really well done, incredible. I mean, it met his criteria, you know, to overcome some of the questions he had. So
that was our goal. Thank you.
I want to thank you guys for the Noble Lie. That was a great first movie for you guys, but I'm really excited about this next project, State of Mind. Holland and James, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us on.
Thank you.
All right, that's a wrap.
That's terrific.
There is a peaceful solution called the Peace Revolution. Now let's take back America. There's a war and we're in it. I know we can win it. So let's take back America. There was a dream, so believe it and get ready to receive it. Now let's take back America.